Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV. I picked up a Nintendo Switch the other day. I wasn't planning on it, I didn't pre-order it, but I happened to stop in at the GameStop website and they had them in stock, so I bought one, and a couple days later it showed up, and we'll take a quick look at it in this video. But what I wanted to do more though is focus in on the launch itself. This was probably one of the most boring console launches of all time. My kids didn't even know there was a new Switch coming out, and they're big Nintendo fans. None of their friends were talking about it. It was very much under the radar to a large degree, although those of us who are enthusiasts of tech and Nintendo certainly knew about it. And of course, Nintendo had enough units available to get them into the hands of the early adopters. I think just about anyone who wanted one probably has a Switch by now. In fact, they say that this was their most successful console launch ever, partly because they made enough of them finally, but also because of the changing nature of video games. I think things are getting much more commoditized. So what I thought I would do in this video is give you a quick overview of my impressions of the Switch 2. There's plenty of reviews out there if you want more detail, but of course I'm happy to come back with a follow-up on specific things that haven't been covered before. But I wanted to talk more about just the video game industry in general, because things seem to be leveling out from a hardware standpoint, and we're not getting these big upgrades that we had before. So we're going to explore that topic as well. Now, before we jump into this video, we do have a sponsor. Father's Day is coming up, and maybe Daddy needs a new desk. And we have a great offer from Flexispot, some makers of some impressive standing desks. Have a look. Now, this video is being brought to you by Flexispot and their E7 Pro standing desk. This will take 440 pounds, about 2.5 Lons, from a height of 25 inches all the way up to 50.6 inches. They have 4 programmable stops along the way, so once you find that perfect spot, you can program it in or adjust manually as your needs require. All versions have a powerful 2-motor, 3-stage design that lift the desk evenly and smoothly. And even the low-cost version I have here is sturdy and secure. Now, these are available in a number of different lengths and finishes, so you can find the version that best fits your needs. All of these desks come with a 15-year warranty, and you can try them risk-free for 30 days and get $50 off the purchase price if you use the code that you see on screen. I want to thank Flexispot for their support of the channel. I do want to let you know, too, in the interest of full disclosure, that I paid for the Switch here with my own funds. All the opinions you're about to hear are my own. Nintendo has not sponsored this video, nor did they review or approve what you're about to see before it was uploaded. So let's get into the Switch 2 hardware here. The best way to describe this is as the original Switch, but better. It seems a lot faster. It, of course, supports 4K when you're plugged into a television, although many of the games will not run at a 4K resolution given the limitations of its processor. It does now have a 1080p display on the handheld side, which is a little bit larger now too. I think it's 6.7 inches. It does run at 120 hertz, and there is a variable refresh rate option on the handheld side. So there are some real improvements here, and you'll see them not only with the Switch 2 titles, but some of the Switch games might run a little bit better than they did before. In my testing, the backwards compatibility, at least with the titles that I have, has been seamless. I haven't seen any issues running some of the older titles. One of the tricks of the original Switch was that its display was at 720p, so in handheld mode it didn't look that bad, although now that you have a larger 1080p display, some of the lack of graphical fidelity becomes a little more evident. One thing that they did do is offer some Nintendo Switch 2 upgrades of existing titles. So for example, I did pay the $10 to upgrade my Zelda Tears of the Kingdom game, which I haven't finished yet, so I will get into that a little bit later this month. But by and large, there really isn't much to talk about insofar as launch titles are concerned. They have, of course, Mario Kart World, which I had up on the display here a second ago. That's the flagship launch title. And as far as I can see, there's only 3 other exclusives, and one is kind of a sort of exclusive. So you've got the Nintendo Welcome Tour, which is their $10 tutorial game. I didn't pay for that. You also have Survival Kids, which is a Konami title, a remake of a Game Boy game from the 80s or 90s. And then they have Yakuza 0 Director's Cut, which is available on other platforms, but this particular remaster of the game is a Switch 2 exclusive. But that was it for launch titles on this. It wasn't all that much of a big to-do with games, partly because they have such a deep library on the original Switch, and all of those games generally will carry right over, including the cartridge-based ones too. Now, to be fair, there are other Switch 2 games that came out at launch, but most of those are ports that you can find on other consoles. And as far as I can see, these 4 are the only ones that were exclusive to this platform. Just like the other Switch, you can detach the controllers here. These are now magnetic, and I was surprised by how well they keep themselves attached to the side of the console. And then, of course, you can slide the console into the dock here, and when you do so, your game pops up on the display most of the time here. And it seems to go pretty quickly here as far as getting the switch from the handheld mode into the desktop mode here, and we're now playing this at the full resolution. So again, pretty much the same as what you experienced on the original Switch, and I think that's largely the point here. They didn't want to reinvent the wheel of a successful console, so they made something with a little more horsepower that feels a little nicer from an industrial design standpoint, but is otherwise a very similar experience. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a little boring. As far as the rest of the hardware is concerned, they did add another USB-C port, so you've got one on the top now and one on the bottom. I'm going to be exploring soon some of the things you can do with those USB-C ports. I do like the new kickstand here in the back. It's a lot sturdier than it was before. So yeah, it's a Switch that is a little better than the original. That's the only way I can describe it. Now, there are some things that I'm not crazy about here as a consumer. The first, of course, is the price of the console. $449 for the console and the dock standalone. If you want the Mario Kart World game, you can get it bundled for $4.99, and the Mario Kart game is a digital download. Your $50 coupon is in the box. One other thing I'm not crazy about is that although they do offer cartridge games that you can purchase for the new console, many of those cartridges are going to be digital key cards where the game is not on the actual cartridge, but rather it's a key that lets you download it from Nintendo. The one thing I kind of like about the key card is that you can at least resell them later, so they do have some fungibility, if you will, so you're not stuck with the game forever, but the game is something that will depend upon Nintendo's servers working into the future. And as we all know, if after a couple of years, a console sunsets and they stop supporting it, so we'll have to see what happens in the long run. I do expect a lot of game makers to go with the digital key card because it costs less to make that versus a 64 gig cartridge. So just be on the lookout for some changes here. And then, of course, the games themselves, especially the first-party Nintendo games, are going to cost quite a bit. Standalone Mario Kart here is $79, and as we all know, Nintendo never lowers the price of their games. Now, as far as battery life is concerned on the new console here, it feels to me about what I get out of my original Switch. Roughly 2 hours and change when you're playing a high-end title like Mario Kart here, with better battery life out of some of the other titles that don't stress the hardware as much. It's about typical for what I've seen out of these high-powered handhelds that we're fortunate enough to have these days in 2025. If there are other things you'd like to see me cover in more detail on the Switch 2, definitely let me know down in the comments section. There has been a lot discussed about this console already by my colleagues here on YouTube who've done some great work, so I'll direct you to other reviews that I think can give you all the details about the console. What I wanted to do was talk more about this launch because it's really one of the more boring launches I've ever seen. Everyone who wanted one got one. Nintendo didn't make a big deal out of it. There wasn't many big, shiny new titles to pick up with it as well. It was very subdued. Why is that? Well, I think Nintendo is trying not to repeat the mistakes they made the last time they had a market-leading console. The Wii was the best-selling video game device of its generation. It sold over 100 million units, but the upgrade to the Wii U, sold only 13.56 million units. And although the hardware was better and the games looked better, it was off-putting to consumers to have this big controller with the screen on it, and especially when you think about the fact that many Wii buyers were not the typical video game player, going back to a more traditional game console was very much off-putting to consumers. And they went from running the market to being the very bottom of it, and I think that's something, of course, Nintendo and their shareholders don't want to repeat. So they sunsetted the Wii U probably a lot sooner than they had planned and came up with the Switch, which to date has sold 152 million units. I think a lot of people actually own more than one. We do in this household. We've got a Switch Lite and the regular Switch, and I guess now we've got the new one. And so they don't want to screw this up again, and I think that's why they're approaching this so conservatively. And Nintendo has always done its best work when they play the conservative game with hardware. And if you look at this device, it looks like a Switch. You could show this to somebody who's never seen a Switch 2 before, and they will immediately recognize the device and the interface here. You pick it up, it feels the same, but a little bit snappier with some higher resolution graphics and interfaces. But it's really a very similar experience. And I think what Nintendo is trying to do here is very slowly ease this transition, get as much as they can out of the original console. I'm sure a lot of games we'll see on both devices moving forward until they get everything transitioned to the new hardware. So it may very well be a number of years before we sunset the original Switch and move on to the next thing. And that speaks to the commoditization we've seen in the marketplace with video game hardware. If we look at the other consoles that people buy, the PlayStations and the Xboxes, they are now running on the same hardware essentially. They have some differences. There are some performance advantages on one versus the other, and they're always coming up with new iterations of their consoles. But at the risk of sounding like an old fart here, back in my day, the consoles had very unique hardware attributes to the point where games were written specifically for the hardware because some consoles could do things better than others. And I think about the Super Nintendo and its Mode 7 graphics. I think about the Sega Genesis and its raw computing horsepower. There was a lot of differences that made these consoles interesting and unique, and developers would go to different consoles to make different kinds of games. Now it's all the same platform with this artificial scarcity of exclusivity that limits games for one versus the other. So what's the future have in store for video gaming? Well, I think we're going to see further commoditization. PC gaming is still growing by leaps and bounds every year. Consumers like that ability to pick and choose their hardware. There's a lot of pre-built things that you can get to run PC games. We'll see more of that in the future, no doubt. And remember, at the end of the day, the PlayStation and the Xbox that you've been playing with over the last 10 or 15 years is a PC, which is why we've seen so many ports from consoles to PCs. And if I'm Nintendo, I'm going to be a little nervous about this because this is not a PC. It's running with some NVIDIA custom ARM hardware. Certainly a lot of the conventions for making games on the Switch are similar to what they're going to be on the Xbox and on the PlayStation. Tools like Unity make it very easy to port back and forth. But if consumers are looking for more choice in their gaming hardware, and if the games are available, does the system matter as much as it used to? I'm not sure how much longer this artificial scarcity of exclusivity can continue when the hardware really doesn't offer anything different between these manufacturers. And we're seeing some signs of this. So for example, Microsoft, who makes its own Xbox consoles, decided not to make its own handheld, instead having Asus come up with something called the ROG Ally that has an Xbox stamped on it, but this is a Windows PC handheld, very much like the Steam Deck is, and I am sure there will be other Xbox badged devices coming out in the near future. Now, of course, this doesn't run, even with an Xbox badge, Xbox console games. It runs the PC games, but most of the Xbox library is available on the PC. So I think this is the direction we're going in here. It took a while to get to this point, but this commoditization of game hardware means that it doesn't matter what your hardware is. If the game is compatible, it will run. So we are at a point, I think, where gaming is going to begin shifting into kind of a hardware agnostic place. And it's just a matter of time, in my opinion. I think this Switch 2 might be the very last Nintendo console as we know it that we see. And does that mean Nintendo pivots to become a software company? Possibly. They've had pressure to do so before. When the Wii U was failing, they had a lot of pressure from shareholders to release games on mobile, which they did. And I think we're going to be at a point where a lot of these game companies are going to get out of the hardware business and focus only on the software, given the fact that I think consumers will be able to game on just about any device they've got in front of them. That will do it for this one. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.